Welcome to Hell of a Picture, a weekly movie podcast where we discuss an unforgettable film and if it truly is a hell of a picture. My name is Andrew Bartlett, and I'm sitting across the internet as I do each and every week from the Ed Exley to my Bud White, Mr. David Hollingshurst.
I guess it's because of the glasses. I had to be Ed, and just like Ed, everyone's always telling me to lose the glasses. Yeah, lose the glasses, Dave. Come on. I don't know a single mega guy in the force who wears them. So
you are Ed Exley.
I'm going to keep the glasses. I need them to see. These are very important for me.
And I am a psychopath that lives by a way of the way of the law. Not quite though.
Sort of. I mean, he's got a code. He's got a code, but he's a little
code, moral code that he won't step outside. If you haven't figured it out yet, we're talking about L.A Confidential this week, a pretty well-regarded film noir from 1997. L.A Confidential. Yeah, we're starting this little run of a couple of film noir movies. How did we get here, Dave? Oh, we did Jackie Brown last week, which was another movie from 1997.
Correct. So we made the temporal jump there. We used the mutual year of release to transition, and I'll say it's probably a little better than our Austin Butler turn. I think that was a little more contrived. This one makes a little bit more sense. And we've been talking about doing this movie right from the get-go. I think pretty early on, we discussed doing a noir run, or at least a couple of noirs, and this one was top on both of our lists, I think. So we've been champing at the bit to get at this, and I'm excited to talk about it.
Yeah, L.A. Confidential is a movie that I've seen a few times, but not one that I necessarily return to a bunch. How about yourself? You've seen this movie a ton of times, right?
I do watch this movie a lot, actually. It's probably one of those things that I will watch every year, or certainly so. Like if I go more than a year, I'll think boy, it's been a long time since I've seen L.A. Confidential. And I remember, I even remember the first time I saw it. It would have been a VHS experience, and just thinking, man, this is friggin' cool. And that kind of the romance of it has never faded for me, I guess. It struck me right away, and it's always stuck with me. Now, of course, as you age, you begin to see things a little differently, and I do have some different thoughts on it versus when I saw it in 1997 or 98 or whenever I managed to catch it on VHS. But like I said, a lot of the finer aspects of it just haven't dulled at all for me over the years. I still really, really dig watching this movie, and I'm super stoked to dig into it.
Sweet. Yeah. This is one for me that it was a while until I saw this. I didn't see this sort of when it first came out. Wasn't that interested in it, being a 13-year-old boy at that point. I was like, whatever.
I was forced, I think, to watch it initially. I'm pretty sure I was required to, just by being somewhere and it was on. But I
right, exactly.
Glad I did.
So this is sort of a quintessential film noir, but it's a film noir being a genre of films that became popular in the 40s and 50s, and so we hadn't seen. There were film noirs sort of in the 90s, and they're still getting made today, but it's it wasn't obviously a dominant genre that it was back then. There was lots of sort of film noirs, which how familiar are you with the genre in general? Like movies from then, 40s and 50s.
Not incredibly well versed, that's for sure, or even maybe at all. If you were to rattle off a few of the big hitters, I might know their names, but no, not well read on the subject. And you are right. This is kind of a anachronistic thing. It's an homage to an era of filmmaking outside of that era. This is 97, so we're 40 or 50 years removed from when the movies that it's referencing would have been made. And so it was an interesting throwback at the time, even though, again, you're correct, there were noirs made in the 60s, in the 70s, in the 80s, I'm sure. but
Yeah.
yeah, this would have felt like an interesting callback, and you can see why the Oscars would have loved it too. I mean, period
Oh,
piece.
of
It sort
course.
of treats an era of Hollywood history as being very hallowed and complicated, and it's just fascinating. So you can see the appeal to the Academy right away.
The Academy loves movies about Hollywood. you know,
They sure do.
like, and they especially love movies that like take place in Hollywood, and takes place in L.A. and sort of like glamorize just the LA existence and life, and and obviously nostalgia. Like they're very, what the Oscars are like with movies of like, modern day movies versus telling movies from you know years before. They tend to lean towards those for sure. Yeah,
They love a
the film
period piece.
noirs.
Yeah, they love a
Oh, of
period piece.
course, they love a period piece, and noirs are sort of these crime dramas. They're a lot, there's lots of elements like femme fatales, like
Mm-hmm.
certainly how they're shot. There's melodramatic elements. It's dark, like lots of things in the shadows. There's lots of like classic noirs, like The Maltese Falcon, Shadow of a Doubt, like Hitchcockian films, Sunset Boulevard, Kiss Me Deadly, The Night of the Hunter. These were all in the 40s and 50s, and these were all sort of these. Um, I would argue that like some of the greatest films ever made,
Hmm.
and very popular for a long time. So, L.A. Confidential pulls on a lot of these and a lot of these story elements to recreate that genre for modern storytelling, I guess, in the 90s. So before we get more into talking about the film, for this is a movie that came out 30 years ago, 20 years ago, 30 years ago. Geez, 25 years ago.
25, yeah, thereabouts, yeah. Yeah.
My math is terrible. 25 years ago.
Ah,
So this is a movie that we like a lot of people probably haven't seen in a while. So as we do every week, David will hit us with the rundown and get us back up to speed with L.A. Confidential.
I surely will. So, the rundown. In the twilight of Hollywood's golden age, the stars still shine and the image of the town still glitters. But when we step outside that halo of light, we find that the city of angels is far from paradise. Our action centers around three very different police officers. Edmund Exley, a politically savvy rising star, admired by command but loathed by the rank and file. Bud White, the brooding pugilist of the force, with a particular hatred for domestic abuse. And Jack Vincennes, a slick and morally flexible narcotics officer who consults for the TV show Badge of Honor and openly shills for Hush Hush Magazine, a tabloid that not only reports the stories, but often takes a hand in creating them. Our three heroes, such as they are drawn together when a multiple homicide at a small diner piques something in each of them. And we watch as they attempt to solve not only the Night Owl massacre, but a broader conspiracy steeped in police corruption, call girls who look like movie stars, the heroin trade, and one truly unforgettable femme fatale. L.A. Confidential was released, as we mentioned, in 1997. It was based on the novel of the same name by James Elroy, the third in his four novels, a series of four novels, collectively known as his L.A. Quartet. The film was directed by Curtis Hanson and adapted for screen by Hanson and his partner Brian Helgeland. It stars Guy Pearce as Edmund Exley, Russell Crowe as Bud White, Kim Basinger as Lynn Bracken, Kevin Spacey as Jack Vincennes, Danny DeVito as Sid Hudgens, James Cromwell as Captain Dudley Smith, and featuring two all-time great Seinfeld alumni, Matt McCoy,
Yes, sir.
a.k.a. Lloyd Braun, as Brett Chase. Good for you, Lloyd! And Jeremiah Burkett, a.k.a. Jean Paul, as Ray Collins. And he's a real son of a bitch in this one. I don't like that bastard, quite honestly. The film cost about $35 million to make, and it brought in an estimated $126 million at the box office. And since this was an era when rentals were still a thing, I'm willing to bet it brought in a shocking amount more via that revenue stream.
Yeah.
At the 97 Oscars, LA Confidential garnered 9 nominations. Best Supporting Actress, Best Adapted Screenplay, Best Picture, Best Director, Best Score, Best Cinematography, Best Production Design, and Best Sound Mixing. It would secure 2 of these as victories, those being Best Supporting Actress, for Basinger, and Best Adapted Screenplay for Helgeland and Hansen. As we discussed last week, As Good as It Gets stole the 2 leading role awards. Not to say that it was undeserved, but they did take both. Well, Titanic made off with almost everything else in existence. It missed out barely on being Best Animated Short and Best Foreign Language Documentary. Otherwise, it would have been a clean sweep for James Cameron and Titanic. The 3rd best film ever made about a boat, coming in behind The Poseidon Adventure and, of course, Speed 2, Cruise Control. And that is another inexplicable shot at James Cameron and also your rundown. I don't know what it is. I can't help it.
Those are good. Can't help it. Movies with boats. That's pretty great. Great rundown, Dave. L.A. Confidential. I gotta say that, why can't you be more like Lloyd Braun? Lloyd Braun, when we see him, what a wonderful moment. We were chatting before, and I realized that Jean Paul is in this movie. I it just didn't recognize him. It kind of took me out of it. As I was rewatching,
he's very different. He's very different in this than he is in Seinfeld. He's a lovable character in Seinfeld. He is far from lovable in this.
Yeah, Jean Paul. That's pretty. Jean Paul. I slept in. Amazing. All right, let's get in. Everybody's saying, no, man. Everybody thinks it was a snooze.
The
volume. Amazing. All right, let's get into it. Let's get into talking a little bit about L.A. Confidential and our thoughts on this. So where do you want to start this week, Dave?
So I had said, you asked me how familiar I was with the noir genre, and the answer, truthfully, was not very. But really, you could say that this is the 3rd or 4th piece of noir, or at least noir-adjacent cinema that we've done. We did Following, which I think is a pretty clear neo-noir example. Blade Runner, a lot would agree. And if you want to extend it to Blade Runner 2049, I would not argue that point. So watching this movie, I was reminded of things that we talked about in all of those episodes. And that's the concept of identity. But it was identity in 2 distinct ways. Blade Runner obviously concerns itself with the realness of our person, whereas Following talked about more what defines us in terms of, our job, our possessions, our actions, people's perceptions of us. And I think we see the latter again here very strongly in L.A. Confidential. In some ways, very literally, in some ways more subtly. But throughout the film, there's this dueling idea of who we are versus how other people think we are, or how we see ourselves versus how others see us.
Yeah, that's, it's interesting you brought up the movies that we've done in the past, Following, Blade Runner, and you're talking about identity, and this is something we talked about with Inglourious Basterds as well. Now, that's not a film noir, obviously, but it's people on how you want to be perceived versus how you are actually perceived. And this is something, obviously, that's a very strong running theme throughout L.A. Confidential, but specifically with the 3 cops. The Vincent's character, the Exley and Bud character are all, essentially they're all playing on the same team, right? Obviously they're all cops, but they're all just vastly different in how they're perceived and how they want to be perceived. But I'd say Exley and Bud mostly even Exley. When I first watched this movie years ago, I would sort of watch and I'm like, oh, Exley is the moral code of the film, or the morally right guy. He's always going to do right. And at the end of the film, we see that he does the right thing, even though it kind of makes him look bad. But then, upon rewatching, it's like, no, he's kind of a piece of shit. He does the morally right thing, especially when, when he's the acting sergeant during Christmas, and he's sort of trying to break up the fight. And he's sort of selling out all the cops. He's doing the right thing, but it's always got it's got a twist on it. It's he's doing the right thing, but it's always benefiting him, right? Like at the same time, like he's very aware of this. I think this sort of was lost on me the first time I watched it. It was only upon kind of rewatching it for this that I was sort of like, man, he like really is like only has his best interest in mind versus, Bud, who really doesn't give a shit about his self-interest. He's just going to do what is right by his moral code, and he doesn't care how he is seen by other people.
Well, that's right. I mean, there's dueling ideas of morality there. Like with Exley, it is very much the letter of the law, and he holds these officers accountable for what they did, which was wrong. But again, you're correct. He does it to advance his career. There is a conniving
Exactly.
aspect to him, and he, yeah, you're right. There is a change in him in the end. He realizes that maybe, okay, like obviously the law itself can be corrupted, so why am I adhering to it so rigidly? And Bud's got his other sort of sense of morality. He's very loyal to the officers who have done wrong. He won't rat anybody out, but he also he does have this deeply passionate hatred for guys who beat up on women, and so you see. And he's willing to break the law in dealing with them. Like he, as an officer, is guilty of brutality all the time. But you can sort of understand his moral motivation for it too. So there's competing ideas of morality between them. And in terms of their identities, they both have different views of themselves versus how they're viewed. Like Bud is looked at as a blunt instrument by his captain, and he even like sort of starts to believe the public perception of himself because he's been told it so many times. He doesn't think he's smart enough to figure out the mystery, even though right from the get-go he shows tremendous skill as a detective, and proves like that he is more than just this kind of brute thug. And then with Exley, the perception of him is sort of colored by his father's reputation as an officer, and every achievement or ambition that he has is judged on that metric. And he's also told by Dudley, the captain, again, that he's a political animal, not a detective, because he's not willing to do the things that Bud White is willing to do, which is interesting because the distinction between a political animal and a detective, it seems to be in how you're willing to hurt people, because Exley will hurt other officers to advance his career, but he won't plant evidence on a suspect he knows to be guilty. And so there's this dichotomy of morality and of perception. And of course, the glasses thing. People keep telling him to lose the glasses, which is sort of, a kind of obvious, I guess it's a useful prop in this conversation of how we're viewed versus how people view us.
Yeah, I love the idea of the glasses too. It's just such a great device, right? It's so small and subtle with respect to, the grand story. It's like you don't really need the glasses, but at the same time, it just reinforces that idea of like, how we view a person, or I guess even in the past too. It's like how you would view a person with glasses, like like it's just like a sign of weakness when we're in reality it's just like
or it's like that Seinfeld bit where he's just like, I have a friend, he wears glasses, doesn't need them because he thinks it makes him look smarter. And what do we think, that this person is just reading so much that they're blowing out their eyes? No. Do we say the same thing about someone with a hearing aid? Oh, they must be listening really closely to some important stuff. No, they can't hear, they're deaf.
Yeah, but that device is so great throughout this movie because it's like, even when he's in the chase and he's like, he's squinting and he's trying to, he has to go back. He's like, wait, I got to go back. I got to get my glasses. I'm just like, you got to get your glasses, man. But yeah, the idea of how they're presented, like you said, their identity and especially with respect to them being the cops are is important. But then there's also Lynn, who is a sex worker, and it almost definitely feels though that, like, again, when I watched this years ago, first time sort of watching it, you sort of think of her. I sort of am watching her as a victim, but upon rewatching, I'm sort of like, no, she's very much in control of what she's doing and her choices and decisions in this, even though it sort of on the surface seems that she is, especially to Exley, that she is like, at the service of Patchett, right? And she has no choice in the matter.
Yeah, you're right. She does seem to have agency, but there is still a sadness about it.
Oh,
There's
of course,
something
yeah,
sort of, unfulfilled. Like, this was sort of a washout of sorts. She does talk about how a lot of the girls, in that line of work, they came here with dreams of Hollywood, and she has that great line where it's that kind of, melancholy acceptance. She says, "We still get to act a little," and I thought that was just a really great line. And yeah, in terms of the concept of identity, I think it's most clearly depicted in Lynn and her fellow sex workers, because they've been surgically altered to look like movie stars. They've been fashioned
yeah,
into something other than they are. And yeah, that's there's sort of the starkest contrast is how her life is divided into halves. It's like you see it physically in the house. You have like the satin drenched front of the house where Veronica Lake lives and entertains her gentlemen callers, and it's all very opulent in an excessive way, you might say. And then
yeah.
then there's that crocheted room in the back where Lynn sleeps, and it's locked away because seeing it would shatter the illusion for her clients, and also because I think it's sacred to her. It's something that she keeps. It has like a hidden treasure quality to it because the lighting in there is different. Did you notice that? Like, it has this kind of like angelic kind
Hmm.
of cast to it, like as though it's like always morning whenever they're in there. And even like the rest of the film, even at daytime, it has a seedier kind of pall hanging over it. But in that room, there's something sweet and something tender. And this is the duality of her life, and how who she really is, which is Lynn Brackett from Brisbane, Arizona, versus who the world sees and who they want her to be, which is Veronica Lake.
I love how you're talking about like you know she talks about how people go there to try to be movie stars and they end up, and it's like we see that no more than when we see you know the the Danny DeVito hush tabloid guy, and like he's sort of the we get introduced to him at the beginning of the movie, that first sort of scene where him and Jack are sort of um taking down I forget his name, the character, the the was it Dave, the actor that's like they're
The
setting
actor,
up
yeah, Matt Reynolds. Matt
yeah yeah
Reynolds
yeah
was his name, I
yeah yeah
believe.
yeah
Yeah,
yeah. So they're taking him down, and it's like it's just them using him, Jack using the tabloid guy, but the tabloid guy using him, using Jack, Exley using the other officers to get what he needs, it appears to using obviously all the women. Like it's all these people are using somebody else. The only one that's not really using anybody is Bud. Like when you think about it, like the captain's obviously using the other officers. He uses Bud. Like he's getting used, but he's not really using anyone. Like so, it's like the more I think about this film with respect to like that concept, it's like Bud really is, even though he does things that are immoral and he won't like do what's by the letter of the law, as you said, like he is morally the sort of center of the film, because he's not really getting used. And it's like when the characters decide not to use somebody, that's when their perception sort of changes. Like take Jack for example. Jack has the sort of um, idea, like when he's getting paid off and getting paid off and getting paid off to like kind of like run these schemes with the hush hush guy, it's not until he's sort of like, well, I guess the question, like, what makes him have that revelation when he's having the drink and he has the $50? He's like, this isn't right. Like, what is that? What is that changing force for him? What do you think that is?
I honestly
Like,
don't
is it his
know.
suspension
I
or like
wondered at
no?
that.
Like,
I
mm,
don't think so. I don't know. Like, I think it might be. It might just be like sort of spending time with Exley, and so I don't know what they're doing. The fact that Exley is he's willing to dig into the Night Owl murders, knowing that it may undo the thing that may like really propelled him career wise forward. Because being going in there, shooting those guys, becoming Shotgun Ed. That's what the Night Owl did for him. It curried
Right.
favor with the rank and file who he was otherwise maligned with. It got him, it got him promoted, and he's willing to go back and dig into it because it's the right thing to do, because he feels like, no, like what the resolution of that case was a lie. And I think maybe Jack's exposure to that kind of ethic is powerful, because he probably hasn't seen it in a long time. He's been surrounded
Right.
by corruption and by people like himself. So yeah, and he's got two images of it. Like there's two sides to him too, as you say, because he does have that
Yeah.
peripety in the end. But he talks about, he's the consultant for Badge of Honor, and he teaches the actor, he teaches Lloyd how to walk and talk like a cop. But he teaches him how to walk and talk like a cop in a TV sense, because he's nothing actually like Jack. And you hear that said at the beginning of the movie. He doesn't walk and talk like
Right.
Jack at all. And he says, well, that's because he's the TV version. So he's crafted this lie of a police officer. And he is also kind of living his own lie as a police officer, because deep
Right.
down, I think he maybe isn't, the slick, well-dressed cop who shills for a tabloid. I think maybe he does want to do the right thing, even though, again, the captain is telling him, don't start trying to do the right thing. You haven't had the practice. And that's there
Yeah.
again.
Right.
There's
Right. Right.
this idea of what command is telling you are, and who you want to be, and who you are. I guess I think the takeaway is you're sort of defined by your actions, or at least Jack is. Like, ultimately, he makes the decision to do the right thing. It gets him killed, but he does sort of salvage his honor in that last gasp.
Yeah, I think you're right. I mean, he's sort of toying with that ever since I don't think he cares that he was suspended, or like he was more so like you said, maybe it was just taking the toll on him, because it was like he's sort of, we have those scenes, yeah, where he talks to the captain, yeah, and he says, don't start trying to do the right thing, like you're not good at it, right? And he's like, yeah, he has this depiction of himself. I will say there's that moment I love when he says like, "Hey, Jack's back," and he's like, "Yeah, Jack's back." Like he's just like,
Yeah,
I love that line. It's like, Jack's
yeah.
back, ha ha.
Just the facts, Jack. Just the facts.
Yeah, he. But yeah, with the moment he sort of discovers the death, and I feel like, he's a narc cop, right? So it's like I think he's fine with like, yeah, busting somebody for weed, breaking up, that sort of things. Like I don't think he has a problem with that. But then when he realizes he was the direct cause of this kid getting killed, like, you know, it, that sort of is a big shift, I think, in his character as well. Even though the shift happens like sort
Right.
of the scene before, he's sort of like, man, I'm setting up this kid again. Maybe it's not his huge shift or his redemption at that point. Maybe he's just like, man, I can't, like, because he sort of shows that in the scene before too, when Danny DeVito sort of is like, oh, like, look who it is, it's our friend, like, let's bring him over. And he's like, hey, have we met? And he's like, yeah. And he's like, Florida Lee party. He's like, yeah, whatever you desire, or whatever. And it's like he has that moment with the kid. Like maybe it's like he's never had to really see the things that he's doing to get his extra money, to get his like fame as a cop. Like he never really has to see like, oh, now he's actually seeing face to face the kid after the fact, and the kid's down on his luck now. He's not going to get any gigs. He's not going to get any work. He's like getting $100 to go sleep with a lawyer or a district attorney or whatever, right? So he's like,
Yeah.
oh man, like this is like, you could sort of see it in Jack's face when he's like, don't bring him over here, and just like, oh god, like he kind of reluctantly does it. So like, yeah, maybe in talking about that, it makes sense. And then when he finally sees the dead kid, he's like, I can't, like, now people are dying. Like it's fine to like throw somebody in jail for 36 hours if they had like smoked some weed, but like, man, like now this, like my actions are killing people. So it's like, I gotta kind of do the right thing here, which is obviously why he gets Exley to help him when he's like, you help me with your thing, I'll help you with yours. You help me with my thing. And, they have that sort of trade-off.
Yeah, I almost feel like watching this again, even right from the get go, like when they make that pot bust in the beginning, that very carefully staged pot bust, you can
Yeah.
almost see the sense in him that he's just like, does this really even matter? Like, I'm busting two people sitting in a house smoking weed with like staring at a Christmas tree.
Yeah.
Like this is like it. Like, meanwhile, in the city, there's gang violence. People are being murdered over in the heroin trade. There's all kinds of legitimate crime going on, and this is something
Sure.
that's
Yeah.
often that we see a lot of. There's things that we're told to be frightened of. Like potheads back in the day. Like this was the most frightening thing in the world to people. The fact that someone somewhere in their neighborhood might be smoking weed.
Yeah.
I think we've come a long way, and we've realized that is not that harmful of an activity. In fact, it may be beneficial for a lot of people in some senses. So I think there's kind of like this sense in him right from the get go, though it does burgeon throughout the movie, that he understands what he's doing is, oh man, like I think he has a little bit of malaise towards it. But I do want to stick with Jack, and specifically the like Hush Hush, the tabloid that he
Yeah.
shills for. That he, he
Yes.
he works with Sid Hudgens, the Danny DeVito character, who is fantastic in
Sid
this. And
Hudgens. Yeah.
yeah, so I had a thought, and in the introductory piece for this series, we talked about how the word picture conjured up images of old Hollywood, like the setting of this movie, and that there was
Right.
something undeniably charming about that, taking care to acknowledge that it wasn't paradise, of course, because of all the popular bigotry of the day, which we see in this movie.
Mm.
But the interesting thing about this movie with relation to that is there's not really any sympathy shown for anybody affected by the prejudice in this movie. In fact, it almost validates it. Like you think about the black, like the group of black guys who, they're really the only black characters in the movie, and they're falsely accused by corrupt cops. But we also see that they are monsters who need to go to jail because they've kidnapped and raped a young woman. And then, Bud makes it his business to beat up men who beat up women, but he also smacks the shit out of Lynn when he is motivated to do so, when he's
Yes.
upset.
True.
And she's kind of accepting of it. And we're almost meant to be accepting of it because he's still one of the film's heroes. So what occurred to me was this. If you think about how the film begins with Danny DeVito narrating the article for Hush Hush magazine and the recurrence of that device throughout the movie, you could think of this whole story as something being told in a pulp magazine. Because if you
Yeah.
consider the way people are projected here, we're not necessarily seeing historical accuracy, because I think real accuracy would involve more nuance. It feels like we're seeing a depiction of people as they were depicted in the stories of the day. It's like we're watching an issue of Hush Hush brought to screen, and it does make a bit of sense, and also a little easier to swallow a lot of what you see in here. And even the name L.A. Confidential, like Confidential was like a magazine. It was an issue, like a thing that was published,
Mm.
with
Yep.
pulpy sort of melodramatic stories. And I think that's what we get here. So does that make sense? Do you think that's like a reasonable interpretation, that what we're seeing is less a period piece and more an homage to the art of the era, like the way the time was depicted in the time?
Yeah, I think that's they run hand in hand, right? Because it's like you can depict something, but then also like the depiction is, you know, a depiction of what it was like in the time, like you said, right? Like it's like, yeah, that's a great sort of idea and thought. Like the movie is the tabloid piece. It is a heightened version of the reality that we actually see, right? It's like, and that was one thing I sort of I hadn't really thought about it like that. You know, I love the voiceover at the start. It's quintessential film noir. It's like setting us up.
Yes.
This is gonna be this cool story. Like get ready, and you know, I think maybe as a thought that makes the film work, like is it makes it as a stronger piece, because if you're thinking about it more of like this retelling of an event versus like this exaggerated retelling of an event, like I guess that's, you know, that's a lot of times movies and storytelling just in general. But I think with respect to like the idea of it being like the like a tabloid, like the story is sort of unbelievable in a sense, right? There's
Mm-hmm.
so many, and like obviously this is not a real story, but just in the context of like the movie, right? Like this is a pretty insane like series of events that happen. And this is sort of typical for film noirs, right? You sort of watch it, you're waiting for the twist, but then there's not just one twist, there's like a second twist and a third twist. And then somehow they're all related. And that's why that was sort of my issue with the film, is that there are these kind of convoluted ideas, yet somehow they all end up affecting one another and they're all related. And that's
Mm-hmm.
just like how it is. And like you said, that was like tabloid stories at the time, and it's like this affects, this is part of the drug trade, and this, you got the corrupt cops, but then you also have the more corrupt cops, and then you have like somebody running sex trades, and then there's drugs, and it's just like, let's just throw all of this and make it all kind of make sense, and somehow it does all work, but that doesn't make it sort of any less convoluted, I think.
Yeah, and again, like it's sort of, it brings you into the mindset of how people saw things contemporaneously. You know, like,
Yeah,
because what this is not a retelling of history in a very authentic way. It's the way people would have, like, you think about, so like what Sid says when he's talking about what sells magazines at the time. He's talking about like writing a
right.
story about Pierce Patchett and why he won't do it. He's like, because Patchett is not gay, he's not a pothead, and he's not a communist. Those are the three
Yes.
things that sell my magazines: commies, reefers, and queers. Pardon the expression, but that is a quote from the movie. Um, so it gives you that insight into what scared people, because that's what Sid is peddling. You know, he's peddling fear, and that's what publications did and continue to do. Um,
Yeah,
you know, and
certainly
and
do.
so commies, reefers, and queers are sort of all conflated into this big fear amalgam. You know, meanwhile, like we said, the police are controlling the heroin racket and they're murdering citizens in diners. You know, but like they're less concerned with that, and so. And also too, like the depiction of again, forgive the expression, but this is of the movie, of the Negroes in it. You know,
Yes.
there's no attempt to show perspective from anyone who is marginalized in any way. Like they just sort of, this is what they are, kind of, you know what I mean? Like it is not a very favorable viewing of anyone other than white guys, basically, is what you see in this movie. Like, those are our heroes. Everybody else is either, if you're a minority, you're a criminal, or you're a victim. And if you're a woman, you're there for emotional motivation for the men. And so watching a movie like that through a modern lens, you're sort of thinking like, oh man, like this is kind of shitty. When you consider it as, a story told in this fashion, in the tabloid, in the
Right.
pulp magazine fashion, it makes sense, and it also becomes more palatable. Um, and even the relationship between Ed, Bud, and Ed, and Lynn, excuse me, is kind of heightened melodrama. It's almost operatic. You know what I mean? Like like
Yeah.
at the end where there's like warmth between them and they're friends, and it's sort of like, I understand you've been through some shit together, but they would not be friends. Like,
Yeah.
Ed basically goes and has like hate sex with Lynn, who accedes to doing it because she's been ordered to by, the guy who is essentially her pimp. And Bud is angry about this because he's been having an affair with Lynn, and he smacks her up. She forgives him. At the end, they're all buddy buddy, and it's just sort of like, that is so unbelievable. But when you're swept up in the drama and the romance and the mystery of everything, it works. You sort of buy into this. It's almost Shakespearean, or something you would see in an opera. It's so heightened. It's so melodramatic. It's unbelievable to our modern sensibilities, but I believe it in the course of the movie because of how it's presented to me. Does that make sense?
Yeah, because it, like you said, it's so heightened and over the top, and just, but it works within this context of the genre that it's recreating or just presenting, I guess, because
Yes.
this is standard for film noirs. I mean, this film has, when you think about it on surface, it's like it has drugs, like you said, it was like commies, reefers, and queers. It has drugs, it has like violence, it has corruption, it has like blackmail, it has sex, it has like all these sort of like dark, like I want to say criminal, but like, you know what I mean? Like seedy stories. And when you combine them all into one, it's like this is what you sort of get. And this is what feels like it makes sense. But like the sort of another one of these ideas is the idea of like justice in the movie, and
Mm.
the idea of like, you know, you were talking about them being buddy buddy at the end, Exley and Bud, and it's like we're sort of following these three cops, right, on different personalities, different perspectives, different ideals when it comes to being a cop, but yet somehow at the end they're all sort of our heroes, or they've all sort of come around and they're all sort of the good guys at the end, when, you know, even in, you know, Jack has to die for that to happen, and then Bud and Exley sort of bury the hatchet and now are both on the same team. And it's like, well, how did this happen, and was justice properly served because of that?
Yeah, it's interesting because we do get competing ideas of justice throughout the movie.
Mm,
And in the beginning, it's very well defined, particularly for Bud and Exley. They both have a very rigid
right.
sense of what they think is justice. But as the film progresses, I think it becomes murkier for both of them, and it leaves off in a kind of murky place. Like Bud would say that killing a criminal is justice. And Inez, the young woman who was sexually assaulted, she agrees. She talks about how the only way she
Right.
could get justice was to lie about when they left her, and to corroborate the police story about the timing, and that they were able to get to the Night Owl and commit the murders. And she sees that as her only chance, because otherwise who's going to care about a Mexican girl? And, you know, and there's again that
Exactly.
idea of you know, of the role of minorities in the story, and women in the story. But like, you know, Bud would say that was justice, but he would never think of holding other officers accountable for police brutality. But that's something that Exley does. We talked about that earlier. And so like the
Yeah.
division sort of comes down to, like, you know, sort of, I guess, the justice of the written law, the dispassionate view of justice, or I guess the antithesis of that, which would be the passionate, emotional view of justice, which kind of, I guess, can be dangerous in a way. But you know, strictly dogmatic justice can also be dangerous because it doesn't account for gray area, or you know, any kind of realpolitik of a situation. So there's these competing ideas that they both kind of meet in the middle on, which is interesting.
Mm-hmm.
At the end, you know, they you know, certainly with Ed certainly bridges the gap, because he realizes that, you know, there's massive corruption here. I can't fight this legally. The only way to really combat this is to get into a gunfight with it, which is how the film, you know, which is the climactic moment of the movie, where they have it out at the Victory Motel. And yet, even knowing that, after the fact, Ed continues to be complicit in departmental corruption, because
Yeah.
he then uses he sort of says, "I'll go along with your story here. We will make Dudley out to be a hero, even though he was an awful, corrupt police officer. But I will buy into that, and I will support your story if you, again, further advance me." And there's this great parting line. I think it's the last line of the movie on the subject of justice, where Lynn says to Exley, she says, "Some guys get the world," you know, talking about him, and others get ex hookers in Bisbee, Arizona, and that's sort of the end. And then they drive away, and it's sort of like the film saying, like, meh, maybe there is no real justice. You know, maybe we just sort of do the best we can in the moment, and we all just sort of take what we get. I don't know, but it's sort of a nice kind of visioning line to end the movie on. It's very wistful, and I like that.
Yeah. It sort of, it puts a pin on it, right? And like you said, it's never going to be perfect, and it's never going to tidy. Everything is like you know, tied up in a neat little package, but like it's gonna be you know, messy, and like you said, I think that's Ed's sort of realization. Like he realizes that it's like he has to, you know, like maybe Ed really hasn't changed at all, because like he's sort of the same at the end. He's sort of like, well, to advance my career, I'm going to only one. I'm going to play ball, but I'm going to be the only one that's, you know, he gets the Medal of Honor again, and he's, now the lieutenant or the captain or whatever position he holds now, and he's gonna do the right
Mm-hmm.
thing. But like again, it's like he's doing it at his benefit, but you know, and Bug gets
But I
the
guess he
girl in
also
the end.
realizes that he's got to get a little dirty too, so
Yeah, that's the
there's yeah,
way.
like there is sort of a change there, and yeah, it is
But it's
it's a
interesting.
nice ending. I like it.
It's interesting though, because like with respect to the captain, you know, he's sort of like the chief, I guess, or whatever, the guy who turns coat or whatever, gets shot in the end. Like I sort of watch him and I'm like, maybe he started just like Ed. Like maybe he wasn't corrupt the whole time. He just like a little bit of corruption, and then it sort of spilled over, right? You sort of see it's like years and years of like being corrupt, like has gotten him more and more into this dark place of like now he's like running drugs and killing other cops and planting evidence and all that sort of thing. So I think it's a fitting end to the film, and it leaves us sort of like in a place of hopefulness, but also you know feels like you said, even for something that a tabloid movie that feels, or a movie that feels like a tabloid, it's like it still leaves a little bit of like you know this could turn out pretty shitty in grand scheme of things, because that's what'll sell.
Yeah, well, you're right. They're not saying that, hey, we fixed everything, problem solved. Like, no, like the
Yeah,
the actual root of corruption still remains. Like, there is that rot at the center of the police department and of the city as a whole, and that hasn't actually been addressed. There's been sort of this instantaneous moment of justice, I guess. Like Dudley and his cohorts got what they deserved. They all got shot, and that's that's a type of justice, and maybe that's all we can sort of hope for. But in terms of rooting out the actual, the cause of it, the actual, the actual root of corruption, no, like that hasn't been fully addressed.
yeah,
That still lingers, and Ed is forced to sort of play in that sandbox. Like they're if he's going to be a cop,
yeah.
he's
Well
going to have
said.
to sort of deal with it, and yeah, and then Bud, I guess, retires to Arizona. I don't know what he does. If he helps Lynn in her dress store, it's sort of, you're left to sort of wonder about that. But it's good that it's not too happy. There is a little bit of happiness, but you understand that the world has not been set to rights.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense. So, okay, we're about that time in the show where we talk about if this is a hell of a picture. Is L.A. Confidential a hell of a picture? Um, what do you think, Dave? Will you turn your key and make it a hell of a picture?
Well, when we talked about Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, you said
Mm-hmm.
that movie is what comes to mind when you hear Mr. Ross say that's a hell of a picture. And for anyone who doesn't know, that's sort of our guiding principle and the inciting idea for this show. For me, this is that movie. This is the purest expression of a picture
Mm,
in my mind, both in terms of
interesting.
the romance of it and all the problematic aspects of it, both of which I think we've discussed here. And I think it's important to acknowledge each of those things and to remember that more than one thing can be true. This can be an example
Right.
of really biased storytelling and casting, and maybe a bad depiction of certain groups of people, and something that we need to be doing less of, or not doing at all. But it can also be a truly fantastic film with qualities that I'd love to see more of. Um, this may not be the best film we've done. It may be. It may not be my favorite film we've done, but it also may be. It is definitely the most hell of a picture film we've done. And
Oh,
that's important here because, again, like for establishing our criteria for what defines a hell of a picture, this film is really seminal for me. So yes, I will definitely turn my key. Hell of a damn picture.
oh, Interesting. So this was one that I struggled with a bit, because I don't hold it as in high regard as you do, but I acknowledge how great it is, and every time I watch it, I'm entertained, and I think I find new things, and it's fun, and it's great. And I love that you brought the idea of the film itself being a tabloid of like events, and you know when you talk about film history and just like films throughout the ages and films in Hollywood, and you know you tell a lot of people it's like, okay, like you should watch you know whatever. So you watch, even if it's an old film in the 70s, like The Godfather, the greatest films ever made. People are sort of like, like that's old. It's like, okay. It's like, well, then I don't want to suggest you watch like, I don't know, Hitchcock movies like Psycho or Rear Window, or any sort of film noir esque film like Laura, or the Maltese Falcon, or The Killers, or all these older films which are just like so important for the history of film, just like what these films presented and created and established for like just films moving forward. So it's like a lot of people have problems, like especially around our age. They're just like, I'm not going to go back and watch these movies from the 40s and 50s. I hate them. Or it's like they're black and white, or like they look weird, or like whatever, right?
Yeah.
Even though there's like such value to these movies, and they're so entertaining if you can kind of watch them from a different lens. But that's why like a film like L.A. Confidential is a really great movie to sort of like creak open the door a bit for this stuff for people, right? I think it's like, okay, you won't go back and watch Sunset Boulevard. It's like, that's fine. It's like, I get it. But like maybe watch L.A. Confidential, and then like maybe that'll like spark your interest enough. And like if you see that, and then you can watch these other movies that inspired this film, like maybe that's a good thing. So I think this is a great gateway to film noirs. And it has modern sensibilities, but it's also like it is such a love letter, I guess, to that genre. So for me, that alone makes it a hell of a picture as well, for sure. Like you said, I don't. This isn't. It is definitely not my favorite film we've done. It's definitely not. I don't think it's the best film that we've done, but I think it definitely is a hell of a picture because of that sort of important aspect of it. So there you have it. We have another hell of a picture in the books, and as I mentioned, creaking the door open to like older films and more important like other films in the genre of film noir. That leads us to what we're going to be doing next week on Hell of a Picture. Do you want to let everybody know, David?
I will, yeah, and certainly a very influential movie in the making of this film. It is the Roman Polanski, well, I think a lot of people would say classic, Chinatown, starring Jack Nicholson. Uh, Man, I have seen this movie. It's been a while. I
Yep.
I know I really dug it, and I saw it. Like you say, I saw it after seeing L.A. Confidential. L.A. Confidential would have been my first
Right.
exposure to
Exactly.
film
Right.
noir, and it was probably a long time later that I saw Chinatown. But I think I was able to make that inroad, and I was open to the idea of watching it because of how much I loved this movie. And so, yeah, you're 100% right in that sense that it can be a great conduit for bringing people to older films.
Yeah, and this is obviously not one from the 40s or 50s, but again, like it is sort of one of the more important film noirs that have been made, and sort of like critically acclaimed and on a lot of like lists. And I'm wondering, if we're going to look at a film that's more sort of an older film, but like again, sort of keeping with contemporary thoughts and ideas. It's like maybe this is a great one to kind of jump back to, and we're not jumping back into something like so far that people won't rewatch it or anything. I think people enjoy Chinatown, so So yeah, we'll definitely be talking about that. And Roman Polanski, who we sort of got a little taste of with Once Upon a Time in Hollywood when we did that a few weeks ago. And no, he wasn't obviously that's a Tarantino film, but he was an important role in that film as a character. So
it's interesting though, because he doesn't talk a ton about Polanski in that movie. And we don't really, I don't even think we hear him speak in that movie, the character of Polanski. He's there, and obviously he's integral to the story.
Yeah.
But I don't think we hear him talk. We don't really hear much about him. He's sort of out of the picture for a lot of it. Yeah. He's just sort of this known presence in it. And I wonder if that was done, because of the problematic aspect of Polanski. And that's something that we can talk about next week, because I'm sure we are going to have to address it. We would be irresponsible to not discuss who he is and what he's done.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm, and his importance to just film history in general and sort of the films he's made. So we'll get into that all next week. So L.A. Confidential, another hell of a picture in our, our slew of films we've done. And we're creeping up on, well, we've been doing this now for, I guess, 6 months now. So we're in the 20s of the films. So it feels like we're just getting started. So this is great. So for David Hollingsworth, my name is Andrew Bartlett. We'll see everybody next week for Chinatown. And this has been another roaring episode of Hell of a Picture.